My grandmother's lawyer cleared his throat and read the will. My cousin Preston got the Miami penthouse worth $4 million. His sister Bianca got the Palm Beach estate. And me? I got an old Singer sewing machine. How fitting for the family disappointment. Preston laughed. But when I discovered what Grandma Dorothy really left me, I had to call the FBI. The morning of the will reading started like any other disaster in my life. My 2012 Honda Civic wouldn't start, so I had to take 2 buses to get to the downtown law offices of Hutchinson, Sterling and Associates. I was already 20 minutes late when I pushed through the glass doors, my teacher's salary blazer looking shabby next to the marble walls and crystal chandeliers. "Raymond, there you are!" Uncle Vernon's voice boomed across the reception area, though his tone carried more irritation than welcome. "We've been waiting. Do you have any idea how much billable time you've just wasted?" Uncle Vernon stood there in his $3,000 suit, checking his Patek Philippe watch for emphasis. At 62, he looked like what he was, a man who'd spent his entire life believing he deserved everything he'd never quite earned. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his shoes cost more than my monthly rent, and his smile never reached his eyes when he looked at me. "Sorry, Uncle Vernon, car trouble." "Still driving that old thing?" "Raymond, you're 34 years old. When I was your age, I owned 3 vehicles." "When you were my age, you were also spending Grandma Dorothy's money," I wanted to say, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't the time or place. Preston appeared beside his father, looking like a younger, somehow more insufferable version. "Ray, good to see you, cousin." He gripped my hand too hard, the way he always did, like every interaction was a competition he needed to win. "How's the teaching thing going? Still at that public school?" "Franklin High, going well, thanks." "Public school teacher?" he said to his sister Bianca, who had just walked up. "Can you imagine? All that potential, and he's teaching teenagers about the Civil War." Bianca air-kissed my cheek, careful not to actually make contact. "Raymond, darling, you look tired. Are you eating enough?" She didn't wait for an answer. "You know, my husband knows people on the Board of Education. If you ever want a real career in administration instead of the classroom." Her husband, Senator Blackwood, stood behind her like a campaign poster, all white teeth and firm handshake. "Raymond, good to see you, son." He was only 5 years older than me, but he had that politician's gift of making everyone feel like a child. "Should we head up?" Mr. Hutchinson's secretary had appeared, a nervous-looking young woman who clearly sensed the family tension. "Mr. Hutchinson is ready in conference room A." The elevator ride to the 14th floor was silent, except for Preston typing on his phone, probably executing trades worth, more than I'd make in a lifetime. Bianca reapplied her lipstick using a compact mirror that looked like it cost a fortune. Uncle Vernon stared straight ahead, already calculating his inheritance. Me? I thought about Grandma Dorothy. She'd died 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday afternoon while I was teaching my 4th period class about Reconstruction. The principal had called me out, and I'd known before he said a word. Grandma had been fighting pancreatic cancer for 8 months. She'd refused aggressive treatment, saying at 91 she'd had her time. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect from a law firm that handled estates for Florida's wealthiest families. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Biscayne Bay, a mahogany table that could seat 20, and paintings that probably cost more than Florida teachers' annual salaries. I took my usual spot at the far end, the same place I'd sat at every family gathering since Dad died. Mr. Hutchinson entered carrying a thick leather folder. He was ancient himself, probably should have retired years ago, but Dorothy had trusted him for 40 years. His hands shook slightly as he set down the papers. "Thank you all for coming. Mrs. Dorothy Whitmore was very specific about her wishes, and I'll be reading her will exactly as she instructed." He began with the smaller bequests. $50,000 to her housekeeper Maria, $25,000 to the gardener who'd maintained her properties, various amounts to charities she'd supported. Then came the main event. To my eldest son, Vernon James Whitmore, I leave my investment portfolio to be managed through the existing trust structure. Uncle Vernon nodded, unsurprised. $8 million just like that. To my grandson Preston Vernon Whitmore, I leave my condominium property located at 1800 Biscayne Boulevard, Miami, Florida. Preston actually pumped his fist, like he'd just closed a major deal. The Whitmore family conference room at Hutchinson Sterling & Associates felt like a courtroom where I'd already been found guilty. The air conditioning was set too cold, the way wealthy people always kept their spaces, as if comfort itself was something to be hoarded. I pulled my father's old blazer tighter around my shoulders, the one I wore to every family gathering like armor that never quite protected me from their barbs. To my granddaughter Bianca Marie Blackwood, Mr. Hutchinson continued, his voice steady despite his age, I leave the estate property at 2847 South Ocean Boulevard, Palm Beach, including all furnishings and the associated beachfront. Bianca touched her pearl necklace and smiled at her husband. Mother Whitmore always said that property would stay in the family, she said to no one in particular, though her eyes found mine. With the right people, of course. The mahogany table reflected our faces like dark water. I could see myself distorted in its surface, looking exactly like what they all thought I was. The teacher son of the failed son, the one who'd never amounted to anything by Whitmore standards. Preston sat across from me, texting his assistant about moving his celebration dinner to a more expensive restaurant. Uncle Vernon reviewed documents on his tablet, already calculating tax strategies for his windfall. There are several more specific bequests, Mr. Hutchinson said, flipping through pages with practiced efficiency. He read through a list of cousins I'd met maybe twice, each receiving amounts between $10,000 and $50,000. Dorothy's personal effects were divided among her friends from the country club. Her jewelry collection went to various female relatives, none of whom had visited her during the chemo treatments. I'd been there every Tuesday and Thursday after school, bringing her submarine sandwiches from her favorite deli, and sitting with her while poison dripped into her veins. She'd tell me stories about buying her first property in 1958, about facing down bankers who wouldn't take a woman seriously, about building an empire one handshake at a time. "You remind me of your father," she'd said during one of our last conversations. "Arthur had integrity. That's rarer than money, Raymond." "Now," Mr. Hutchinson said, pulling me back to the present, "we come to the final personal bequest. To my grandson Raymond Arthur Whitmore, I leave my 1952 Singer featherweight sewing machine, model 221, currently stored in the attic of the family home at 445 Coral Way." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before Preston's laughter filled the room. Not a chuckle, not a suppressed giggle, but full-throated laughter that echoed off the windows. A sewing machine? He was actually wiping tears from his eyes. "Oh my God, that's perfect, that's absolutely perfect. Ray gets a sewing machine." "Preston, please," Uncle Vernon said, but his mouth twitched with his own suppressed amusement. "Show some respect." "No, Dad, don't you see? It's poetic. The teacher gets an antique sewing machine. What's he supposed to do with that? Teach home economics? Do they even have that in public schools anymore?" Bianca leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Raymond, I think it's sweet. Grandma Dorothy always said you were special to her. This must have sentimental value." "Sentimental value doesn't pay rent," Preston added, still chuckling. "But hey, Ray, if you need money, I'm sure that thing's worth at least $100 on eBay." Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat. "The sewing machine is specified as a restricted bequest. It cannot be sold, donated, or transferred for a period of 10 years. So he can't even sell it." Preston was beside himself now. "Ray, did you piss her off somehow? Did you correct her grammar one too many times?" I kept my face neutral, a skill I'd perfected over years of family gatherings. Inside, my stomach churned with a mixture of hurt and confusion. Dorothy had been my champion, the one person who'd defended my choice to teach, who'd said the world needed more people who shaped minds instead of just moving money around. Why would she do this? The estate is otherwise to be liquidated according to the trust provisions established in 2015, Mr. Hutchinson continued, closing the folder. The family home will be sold, with proceeds divided according to the percentages outlined in Appendix C. Mr. Raymond Whitmore is permitted to retrieve his bequest at his earliest convenience. Uncle Vernon stood first, buttoning his suit jacket with the smooth motion of a man who'd gotten exactly what he expected. Well, Raymond, I suppose you'll want to get that machine soon. We're putting the house on the market Monday. Monday? Grandma's only been gone 6 weeks. The market's hot right now, Vernon replied, already heading for the door. No sense being sentimental about real estate. The rest of the will reading blurred into a symphony of greed and satisfaction. Preston called his office to have champagne ready for his return. Bianca started discussing renovation plans with Senator Blackwood, something about a new tennis court where Grandma Dorothy's vegetable garden had been. Uncle Vernon was already on the phone with his financial advisor, setting up meetings to discuss major portfolio integration. I sat there, watching them carve up her life like vultures over carrion. Not one of them mentioned missing her. Not one of them shared a memory or shed a tear. They'd gotten what they came for, and now Dorothy Whitmore was just a signature on a check. Raymond, Mr. Hutchinson's voice cut through my thoughts. There's a storage unit key here for you as well, for the sewing machine. The family home is being shown to buyers this weekend, so you'll need to collect it before then. He handed me a small brass key with a paper tag reading, Attic, East Wing. I pocketed it without looking at the others, though I could feel their amused glances. Don't forget to check if it comes with thread, Preston called out as I headed for the door. Wouldn't want you to have to spend your own money on accessories. The drive to Grandma Dorothy's house in Coral Gables took 40 minutes in Miami traffic. I'd made this drive hundreds of times over the years, but this would be the last. The sprawling Mediterranean Revival mansion sat on 2 acres of manicured grounds, its coral stone walls glowing pink in the afternoon sun. This was where Dorothy had moved in 1975, after her real estate empire had grown beyond her wildest dreams. The house felt hollow without her. Maria, the housekeeper, had already been let go, and the furniture was covered in white sheets like ghosts of better times. My footsteps echoed on the terrazzo floors as I climbed to the 3rd floor, then pulled down the hidden ladder to the attic. The attic was stifling, filled with decades of accumulation. Boxes labeled Christmas 1987, Vernon's college, Arthur's books. That last one made me pause. My father's things, boxed up and forgotten after his death 5 years ago. I ran my finger through the dust on top, leaving a clean stripe like a wound. The sewing machine sat in the far corner, pristine in its black carrying case. A note was taped to the handle in Dorothy's spidery handwriting. For Raymond. Handle with care. I carried it down to my car, the case surprisingly heavy for such a small machine. As I set it in my trunk, Preston's BMW pulled up behind me. Couldn't resist seeing the old place one more time, he said, getting out. But his eyes were calculating, not nostalgic. Dad wants me to check what else is up there. Make sure nothing valuable gets left behind. It's mostly Christmas decorations and old photos. Photos can be valuable, especially if they're embarrassing. He winked like we were conspirators. Bianca's husband has political ambitions beyond the state senate. Can't be too careful. He disappeared into the house while I sat in my car, staring at the sewing machine case through my rearview mirror. Why this? Why leave me something so seemingly worthless when she knew how they'd react? That night in my apartment, I placed the machine on my kitchen table. The black metal gleamed under my overhead light, Singer spelled out in gold lettering across the front. The machine was in perfect condition, but when I examined it closely, something felt off. The needle had never been threaded. The foot pedal's cord was still wrapped in its original paper. This machine had never sewn a single stitch. Dorothy had told me stories about her original sewing machine, how she'd started her empire by altering designer clothes for wealthy Miami Beach widows. "Every fortune starts with a single thread, Raymond," she'd said. "You pull it carefully, and gradually the whole fabric reveals itself." But this wasn't that machine. That one was in the Smithsonian now, part of their Women Entrepreneurs of the 20th Century exhibit. She'd donated it years ago, proud that her story would inspire others. I opened every compartment, examined every surface. In the small drawer meant for attachments, I found the original 1952 manual, yellowed but intact. The fabric tray underneath the machine felt loose when I touched it. When I lifted it, my heart stopped. A white envelope, sealed, with my name written across it in Dorothy's unmistakable handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of her personal stationery, the watermark of her initials barely visible through the cream paper. The message was brief, but it changed everything. "My dearest Raymond, if you're reading this, then the vultures have had their feast. The machine is just the beginning." I read the rest of Dorothy's note 3 times before my hands stopped shaking. "Look where the roses never bloom." Remember our talks about the old Whitmore estate in Coral Gables? Some gardens hide more than beauty. The truth about your father's death is there. Trust no one in the family. The combination is your father's real birthday, not the one Vernon tells everyone. All my love, Grandma D. My father's death. The words hit me like ice water in my veins. Arthur Whitmore had drowned when his fishing boat capsized off Key Biscayne 5 years ago. The Coast Guard called it a tragic accident, a sudden storm catching an experienced sailor off guard. I'd never questioned it. Dad knew those waters better than anyone, but the ocean doesn't care about experience when it decides to take someone. But Dorothy was suggesting something else entirely. I called Franklin High at 6 the next morning and left a message claiming food poisoning. Then I drove to the old Coral Gables estate, the first property Dorothy had ever purchased in 1958. Unlike the mansion where she'd lived her final decades, this place had been abandoned for years. Dorothy kept it for what she called sentimental reasons, refusing every developer's offer no matter how astronomical. The wrought iron gates were rusted but not locked. The driveway was cracked, grass growing through concrete like nature reclaiming its territory. The house itself, a 2-story Spanish colonial, stood empty with plywood over most windows. But I wasn't here for the house. The garden sprawled behind the property, 5 acres that had once been Dorothy's pride. She'd grown everything here: tomatoes, peppers, mangoes, avocados. But the rose garden had been her masterpiece except for one corner where nothing ever grew. Bad soil, she'd told me when I was 12 and tried to plant sunflowers there. Some earth just won't accept life, Raymond. You have to respect that. Now her words carried different meaning. I found the dead patch easily, a 6-foot square of bare earth in the southwest corner where even weeds refused to grow. The morning sun was already brutal, and sweat soaked through my shirt as I started digging with the shovel I'd brought from my apartment. 1 foot down, nothing but sandy soil and rocks. At 18 inches, my shovel hit something solid. Not a rock, but something that clanged like metal. I cleared the dirt away with my hands, revealing a steel box about the size of a briefcase with a combination lock built into the lid. Dad's real birthday. I knew this story only because Dorothy had let it slip once after too much wine at Christmas. Vernon had changed the official story to hide the fact that their parents had conceived Arthur before marriage, a scandal in their social circle back then. The real date was November 15, 1971, not March 15, 1972. I spun the dials, 111571. The lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in plastic to protect against moisture, were documents that made my stomach turn. The first folder contained property deeds and bank statements showing systematic transfers from Dorothy's accounts to offshore holdings in Vernon's name. 15 years of theft, methodically documented in Dorothy's precise handwriting. The second folder was worse. Emails between Vernon and Preston, printed and dated. "Arthur's getting too close," one read from Preston to his father. He called asking about the Bayshore property discrepancies. Vernon's response, "I'll handle your uncle. Family meeting on the boat next week." The date was 3 days before Dad died. My hands trembled as I found the next document, a work order from a marine repair shop. Hydraulic steering system modification for Arthur Whitmore's boat, paid for by Vernon Whitmore, completed the day before Dad's final fishing trip. There were photographs, too. Preston meeting with a man identified in Dorothy's notes as Marcus Torelli, a mechanic who'd been convicted twice for insurance fraud. Timestamps showed these meetings happened the week before Dad's death. At the bottom of everything was a letter in my father's handwriting. "Mom, I've discovered Vernon and Preston have been stealing from you for years. Millions diverted through shell companies. The Bayshore property was sold for $12 million, but they reported $6 million. The difference went to accounts in the Caymans. I have proof. I'm going to confront them tomorrow at the family meeting on Vernon's boat. If anything happens to me, know it wasn't an accident. I love you, Arthur." The letter was dated the day he died. The last item in the box was a flash drive and another note from Dorothy. "Everything is backed up here. 3 copies exist in safety deposit boxes you'll find listed in the attached document. I've been gathering evidence for 5 years, but my lawyers said it wasn't enough while I was alive. They'd destroy me with countersuits and delays. Dead, I'm untouchable. Dead, they can't threaten me. Make them pay, Raymond. Your father deserves justice." I sat in that dead garden for 20 minutes, reading and rereading every document. The evidence was meticulous, thorough, and damning. Dorothy had spent 5 years building a case that would destroy Vernon and Preston. She'd documented not just the murder conspiracy, but decades of embezzlement totaling $30 million. The flash drive contained gigabytes of additional evidence. Security footage from the marina showing Preston and Vernon near Dad's boat the night before he died. Bank records showing massive transfers immediately after his death. Even a recorded phone conversation where Vernon told someone that the Arthur problem has been resolved. My phone rang, jarring me from my spiral of rage and grief. Preston's name appeared on the screen. "Ray, where are you? You were supposed to meet me at the bank this morning to sign off on the house sale papers. I never agreed to that." "Well, Uncle Vernon needs all heirs to sign, just a formality. Listen, I'll throw in $5,000 cash if you come now. I know the sewing machine thing was rough. Consider it a family bonus." The casual cruelty of it, offering me pocket change while sitting on millions they'd stolen, made my decision clear. "I'll pass, Preston." "Your loss, cousin. By the way, did you ever figure out what to do with that machine? I know a vintage shop that might give you $200 for it." I hung up and called the FBI. The Miami field office transferred me twice before I reached Agent Patricia Martinez in financial crimes. I explained I had evidence of embezzlement and murder. She was skeptical until I mentioned the amount involved and started listing the evidence. "Don't touch anything else," she said, her tone shifting from routine to urgent. "Where are you exactly?" 2 hours later, the abandoned garden was swarming with FBI agents. They cataloged every document, photographed every page. Agent Martinez, a woman who looked like she'd seen enough corruption to last several lifetimes, reviewed the flash drive contents on her laptop. "Your grandmother was very thorough," she said. "This is prosecutable. The murder conspiracy will be harder to prove, but the financial crimes are bulletproof. What happens now? We build the case. This will take a few weeks, maybe a month. We'll need you to continue acting normal. Can you do that?" The next 3 weeks were torture. I taught my classes, graded papers, attended faculty meetings, all while knowing what was coming. Preston called twice more about various estate matters, each time his condescension making my skin crawl. Uncle Vernon invited me to lunch to discuss your future, which I politely declined. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning, coordinated across 3 locations. Vernon was taken from his country club during his weekly golf game. The FBI agents waited until he was on the 9th hole, surrounded by his cronies, before announcing his arrest for murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, and wire fraud. The local news caught it all on camera. Vernon in his golf attire being led away in handcuffs. Preston's arrest was even more public. FBI agents entered his Manhattan investment firm during their morning meeting. According to a colleague who called me later, Preston tried to run. Actually tried to sprint through the office in his Italian loafers before being tackled by an agent near the elevator. They marched him out through the lobby in full view of every employee and client. Bianca's arrest came at a charity luncheon where she was being honored for her philanthropy. Agent Martinez told me later that Bianca had fainted when they read the charges, which included money laundering through her husband's campaign funds. Senator Blackwood wasn't arrested, but his political career ended that day. The investigation revealed the full scope of their crimes. Vernon and Preston had created 47 shell companies to siphon money from Dorothy's empire. They'd sold properties below market value to their own holdings, skimmed management fees, even taken loans against Dorothy's assets for their personal use. The murder evidence was more complex, but the prosecutors felt confident. The tampered hydraulic system, the meetings with Torelli, the timing of the transfers after Dad's death, it all painted a clear picture. Torelli himself, facing his 3rd strike, agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. During the trial, I learned things that made the betrayal even worse. Vernon had been stealing from his mother since the day she gave him power of attorney. Preston had joked in emails about bleeding the old bird dry. Bianca had helped hide assets by purchasing property through her husband's donors. They'd killed my father for trying to protect his mother. They'd spent 5 years laughing at family dinners while his orphaned son sat at the same table. They'd stolen millions while Dorothy lay dying of cancer, too weak to fight them, but strong enough to document every crime. The trial lasted 6 months. I sat in that courtroom every day I wasn't teaching, watching as prosecutors laid out the case Dorothy had built from her deathbed. Vernon's lawyer tried to paint him as a devoted son, managing his mother's complex affairs. That defense crumbled when they played the recorded phone call where he called Dorothy a senile old witch who should have died years ago. Preston broke first. Facing life in prison for the murder conspiracy, he agreed to testify against his father in exchange for a reduced sentence of 25 years. His testimony was devastating. He described how Vernon had planned everything, how they'd tested the boat modification on another vessel first, how they'd watched the weather reports waiting for the perfect storm to provide cover. "Did you feel any remorse?" the prosecutor asked him. Preston looked at me across the courtroom. "Arthur was going to destroy everything we'd built." "You mean everything you'd stolen?" "I mean everything we deserved." That word, deserved, summed up their entire worldview. They deserved Dorothy's money because they were her blood. They deserved to steal because they were smarter. They deserved to kill because someone stood in their way. Vernon got life without parole. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they read the verdict, he stared straight ahead, still believing himself the victim. Bianca got 15 years for money laundering. Her husband divorced her before the trial ended, distancing himself from the scandal that destroyed his career. But Dorothy had saved her biggest surprise for last. Mr. Hutchinson called me the day after the verdicts were read. "Raymond, there's an addendum to your grandmother's will." It was sealed with instructions to open only upon the successful prosecution of the involved parties. I met him at his office, the same conference room where I'd been humiliated 6 months earlier. This time, I was alone. "Your grandmother restructured everything 2 years ago," he explained, sliding documents across the table. The bequests to Vernon, Preston, and Bianca were contingent on them being free of any criminal wrongdoing regarding her estate. Upon their conviction, everything transfers to you. Everything. Every property, every investment, every penny they thought they'd inherited. $50 million in total, plus damages from the criminal restitution. The Miami penthouse Preston had already redecorated. The Palm Beach estate where Bianca had started building her tennis court, all of it mine. But more importantly, there was another letter from Dorothy. My dearest Raymond, if you're reading this, then justice has been served. I knew the truth about your father's death within weeks of it happening. A mother knows when her child has been murdered. But I was old, sick, and they controlled so much. Going to the police would have meant lawyers, delays, and likely my own death before seeing justice. So I waited, I planned, I documented, and I trusted you. You were never the disappointment, Raymond. You were the only one who inherited what really mattered from me. Integrity. Your father had it too, which is why they killed him. The sewing machine was my first purchase when I started over after leaving my abusive first husband. It was never used because it was a symbol, not a tool. It represented new beginnings, the power to create rather than destroy. Now it's your turn. Make your father proud. I kept teaching. Walking away from my students felt like letting Vernon and Preston win, like admitting that money was more important than purpose. But I used Dorothy's fortune to create the Arthur Whitmore Foundation for Ethical Business Practices. We provide scholarships for first-generation college students, support for whistleblowers, and funding for forensic accounting investigations into corporate crime. Preston's penthouse became a shelter for abused women starting over, just like Dorothy once did. The Palm Beach estate was converted into a retreat for teachers, offering free weeks of respite for educators dealing with burnout. The Coral Gables property, where Dad's letter had waited 5 years for discovery, became a memorial garden. Where the roses never bloomed, I planted an oak tree with a plaque. Truth grows where secrets are buried. The sewing machine sits in my classroom now, in a glass case with Dorothy's story beside it. My students often ask why I keep it there in a history classroom. Because history isn't just about the past, I tell them. It's about the threads connecting us to those who came before. Sometimes pulling one thread unravels everything. Sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Last week, a student stayed after class, troubled by something in her own family. As we talked, she kept glancing at the sewing machine. "Mr. Whitmore, how did your grandmother know you'd figure it out?" She knew I'd remember the stories she told. She knew I'd care enough to look deeper, but mostly, she knew I was my father's son. That's the real inheritance Dorothy left me. The knowledge that justice might be delayed but doesn't have to be denied, that truth can survive burial if someone cares enough to dig, and that sometimes the smallest gifts carry the greatest power. Hey everyone. If you enjoyed this story about uncovering family secrets and finding justice, please hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Raymond's situation. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories every week. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones everyone can see.